something like what's going on throughout the world, even in this country, some of what you outlined, how is that allowed to continue?
It is one of those cases where in a lot of countries there's actually really good laws on the books. In the 1970s there was a bunch of laws put on in many countries that there was an international push to have labor laws around things like slavery, that it would not be okay to own another person, this kind of thing. In places like India there's wonderful laws on the books, but what happens at the local level is they just don't get enforced. So you have bribery and you have different kinds of kind of petty crime happening at the level of people paying off local officers. And so just at the local level, it's basically a trickle down where there's a great law on the books, but at the local level, many people are being abused. And when we're talking about people being taken into slavery, and this case of Shaibia, say in India, where she pays a $10 debt and then they say, well, now you have to work that off at a rice mill. The way that it happens is they go into the mill, and from that point, they're actually there's so much deception and whatnot and brutality, but they literally will say, okay, well, now that you're here, I had to pay $10 in gas to get you here, so now your debt is $20. Well, what happens is they only get paid about 15 to 16 cents a day for their work, and their work is usually 16 to 18 hours a day. So they're exhausted, they're working 6 days a week, and what ends up happening is at the end of the week, they don't even have enough money to hardly pay for food for their family. So they buy a little bit of rice, they maybe have to pay for their room, and at the end of the week, they're no closer to having that $20 than they were when they started. And so it ends up going on for years that way.
And that $10 debt can turn into years and years and years. And the reality is too, Henrietta, that this is a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
And whenever that kind of money is in play, people will find a way. If someone, whether it's manufacturing bricks in India, if there's a way to provide all your labor for free and all the profit is yours, people will find ways to do that illegally, immorally, but that's what happens.
Well, you say it's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and that sounds almost as if it's a corporate effort. But it's how would you break that down when you talk about a multi-billion-dollar enterprise?
I think the same way we would look at drugs or gun running. It's not necessarily it's not a unified effort. Is there organized crime behind it? Absolutely. Not in every part of the world. In some cases, it's simply people who are taking advantage of the lack of enforcement of laws or the lack of laws. In other cases, it is very much a product of organized crime. Russia is a huge example of that. Collectively, and I don't know the figures offhand, Betty Ann, you might have a better sense of what the numbers are, but it's staggering the amount of money that exchanges hands.
I think that's where a lot of people too, they just think of it as how could anyone commit this evil? And what really is happening at the end of the day, a lot of people are making money at it. So what is happening is you've got about a $32 billion industry is what they're saying people are making in the slave trade nowadays. And
worldwide.
Worldwide. And what you have right now is the U.S. stands in a very interesting position because of our history of slavery and the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil Rights Movement and all. We're in a country that really is saying, I thought slavery didn't exist anymore. And what's happening is that we are actually, through our State Department, through our state and local laws, we're actually saying we actually believe this is not going to be a problem in the U.S. We do not want this to be a problem in the U.S. When we see it happening in India, we see it happening in Cambodia. Our State Department right now is actually increasing its budget to be able to basically help these countries figure out how to deal with their issue that's already going on. But I don't want to by any means pretend that it's not happening here. But what I mean is the longevity and the culture of the U.S. is saying right now there's an estimate of 20,000 people that are trafficked into the U.S. a year, and that is for sex slavery and for domestic servitude. But the bigger issue that is the local issue is that 200,000 teens in America are estimated at being at risk of being trafficked.
Well, I think there is something too that might be even more real than those at risk, because you just now said that the government is saying we don't want this to happen here. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is it's happening here already. Yes. I mean, we've already established that by saying it could be someone coming over as a domestic, someone in a massage parlor. I mean, it's right here. And we can't say, Or can we? That there's corruption and there's bribery and there's organized crime.
Well,
and I'm sure that must be existing too.
Well,
and that is
where
more
there are
the
people, I would
liberalism.
assume that there is some bribery and corruption and crime happening, because I don't think there's any society where we would believe that doesn't happen. I would argue it's probably not as widespread here, because we do have greater checks and balances. We do have a stronger legal system. It's not perfect, but it's stronger than in many places of the world.
Well, we have checks and balances, but we still have prostitution. Let's say teen
Absolutely.
prostitution on
Which,
the streets
by definition,
of various cities, and that's going on.
by definition, we would call child prostitution human trafficking, because they cannot legally consent to that activity. So that would be a form of trafficking.